You've reached the Signal Watch, movies, television, comics, and more. I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and with me this evening is
Simon Day again. Hello, good to be here.
And Simon, we are watching. We watched which movie?
We watched Zulu from 1964, directed by Cy Field, produced by Stanley Baker and Cy Field, and starring Stanley Baker as Lieutenant Shard, Michael Caine as Bromhead, James Booth as Hook, Nigel Green as Colour Sergeant Bourne, Patrick Macnee, who I only realised after about a million times watching this, one of my favourite horror actors, and from Clockwork Orange, in his wheelchair, Patrick Macnee as Surgeon Major, Jack Hawkins as Reverend Witt, and Ulla Jacobson as his daughter Margareta, and of course the narrator, Richard Burton.
Zulu is a movie I had heard about. Probably, it was always on the video shelf at every place I went.
That's interesting.
I was always it would play on TV, on American TV. It felt like it was a movie that like TBS or maybe other cable channels would show, but it was always on at like 2:00 on a Sunday. It would be
perfect
like
time for it.
Yeah. Your dad is going to want to watch this while he, has an iced tea or whatever.
Digest his lunch. His Sunday lunch.
Exactly. But I always got confused, and this went on for years. And what I read today told me, and something you'd mentioned told me it wouldn't have mattered. There's Zulu and Zulu Dawn.
Yeah, and Shaka Zulu.
And then Shaka Zulu.
Yeah.
And so all of these movies would be at the video store, and I'd always be like, I don't remember which one people said to watch. And so I'd be like, I'm going to ask. And this went on for years, and eventually I gave up and just never watched any of them. With the one that clearly, from what I had heard from my friends, was the good one was this one.
Yeah.
Because they probably watched it, on a Sunday at 2:00 on TV. But it's considered to be, it was voted, I want to say in like 2015 or something like that, the 93rd best British film. Considering the British film output, that's nothing to sneeze at. No,
and it's I'd be interested to know what it's like about showing this on TV now, because of course, society's become a lot more sensitive, I think, especially in the last 10, 15, 20 years. But when I was growing up, this was always on TV in the 1980s and 90s. And again, hilariously, it was like a pretty kind of like, a pretty solid Christmas film. like Naughty Hijack. It was like
it's a double bill.
Yeah, we've had our presents. Let's sit down and watch British soldiers murdering natives. And and it's kind of one of those films like The Italian Job. It's just quintessentially British. Obviously, once you've watched it, you can obviously understand why. I mean, watching it last night, I was kind of thinking, this is kind of like a British Alamo, but with a kind of happy ending. Really?
Yeah, the ending of the Alamo is less chipper.
And also, like, I think even the producer said, so we can talk about controversy and whether this is deemed acceptable anymore. But it's interesting kind of reading up about it because the producer said originally he just wanted to make like a British Western. He said, I want to make something the same as Cowboys versus Indians, which again, even that's contentious these days, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But back then, it was quite clearly, not even goodies versus baddies, but like, here's the people here, here's the settlers, the white settlers, the Christian, believers who are trying to like, better themselves and better the land. And here's the indigenous people who are, attacking them. And then, stand back and watch really. And, we can talk about it later, but I think Zulu does quite a fair job of, showing the sides equally and not really showing, the Zulus in a negative light. I think actually makes them look quite heroic as well.
Yeah. So, and that's not a yeah. So let me disagree with you. I think
this is a big topic to get into. Isn't it?
Yeah, it's gigantic. The thing that's tough about this movie, and if you were to do it now, is it doesn't have any POV characters that are Zulu.
Yeah. You kind of have the king a little bit at the start, but he gets phased out pretty quickly.
Yeah, he's gone in the first 12 minutes of a 2 hour and 18-minute movie. So it's an interesting film, and it's interesting to hear that was what the producers had in mind. And when I was watching it, I was like, there's been so many movies because the real point of the film is a small band of hopelessly outnumbered soldiers just fighting against impossible odds. And in this particular case, half of them live or something like that.
Yeah, well, so basically a little bit of background. So basically a kind of like an English encampment and incendiana of, I think, 1,500 troops were kind of wiped out by 4,000 Zulu. And then this was on January the 23rd, 1879. And then these Zulus marched down the road where there was like a little field hospital, which had 150 troops, I think 30 of which were sick. And of course, compared to what they'd just done, this was going to be nothing, because it's 150 versus 4,000. And these guys managed to defend this hospital and kind of hang in there for like 2-3 days until, the Zulus basically, kind of backed off. And plus, in real life, which you don't see in the film, reinforcements did turn up. But even so, no mean feat, I mean, basically these guys were like, fighting 24 hours a day for several days just to stay alive.
Yeah. I mean, there's comparisons you can make to, you mentioned the Alamo, which was the first thing I thought of, probably about halfway through the film. As they were looking over the readouts. I'm trying to remember the word.
Dispatches?
No, whatever they called the piles of grain that they were using. Readouts. It's a real word, and it's fallen out of my head anyway.
That's right.
But basically, they're barriers. They're looking over these improvised barriers, and over the hill.
The bags. Yeah, they're kind of like sandbag.
Yeah. And you suddenly, it's like wave after wave on all these hilltops. And that was the shot that I'd been told about as a kid by my friends of like, it's amazing. The Zulus show up and it's just like, they're everywhere.
Well, even before that, I would say what makes this distinctive is you hear the Zulus coming from miles away because they're banging their shields, but it sounds like a train.
Yeah. Like
a big steam train. And that's, even now, I think there's a trailer for Zulu Online where it just keeps playing that. And, and all the British characters are like, what's that? What's that? What's happening? And it's like, that's really good. That's a great setup.
Yeah, they do a lot with sound in this movie. A lot with sound. But anyway, that's when I was like, oh, this is like the Alamo. And then I started thinking, well, it's like 300. How many films and stories do we have about this small, scrappy group that somehow is like hopelessly outnumbered, that, you know, either wins or loses the day, but it's either a moral victory or it's an actual victory, as in the case here.
Well, we've seen this in, you know, Aliens, The Wild Bunch, Dog Soldiers. I think Starship Troopers we were talking about the other day.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, so a lot of people have kind of like not necessarily copied this, but, you know, the same kind of Alamo template.
Yeah, and I mean it's
the A-Team. Every episode of the A-Team.
But it's difficult to talk about because there's, you know, right now we're in a period which I think rightfully, you know, we're doing a lot of reexamination of you know, what was colonialism and what was the impact, and you know, especially in a country like South Africa where, you know, I heard the words apartheid in South Africa in the same breath when I found out about what South Africa was as a kid.
Well, yeah.
And so, as you said, the movie it's entirely, I mean,
well, it's
85-90% of British POV, but they do look at the Zulus as actual people, and they do look at them as like they're not just being treated. One of the problems I had with the movie Black Hawk Down when I saw it years ago, was
I thought it was America in their depiction of
yeah, it was. I was getting all these like amazing reviews, and I was like, "You have completely dehumanized the people who are actually in Somalia in that movie."
It's like crazy. It's crazy suicide bombers with turbans and nothing else really.
Yeah, it basically felt like aliens. Like that was the one that I was like, "Oh my god, this is aliens," but they're just treating Africans as if they're like some other species that's like crawling in and, you know, getting in it. And then it was like every reviewer was giving this movie a pass, and I was like, "Yeah, we went there. Like, we were the invasive species in this scenario."
And the same with this, you know, because you got to remember we're watching this through several different prisms. There's obviously the actual history of what happened. Then there's the fact that this is a movie made in the early 60s, which I think was very forward-thinking and open-minded for an early 60s movie.
Agreed.
It's also made by mainly working-class British people. Stanley Baker was working class. You got Michael Caine in there. So these guys aren't going to be particularly pro-class and pro-military. And, like, you know, they're celebrating more the raw heroism of the common man. You know, because a lot of these guys in the films don't want to be there. You know, it's like all these Welshmen who want to be home farming.
Yeah.
You know, they're just doing their job, you know, and their job is to, like, you know, defend this place, even if they don't really agree with it. I think there's even a line, you know, at one point where a soldier says, you know, "Why us?" And Nigel Green, who's fantastic, you know, he goes, "Because we're here, lad. Nobody else is." But it's like, yeah. And then, of course, now we're looking at it again from our modern day, you know, vantage point of like, oh, is that acceptable? You know, could you show that even on TV anymore? Because really, it's showing the exploitation of the third world, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's an interesting artifact of the 60s and of, you know, colonialism, and, you know, and of course there's a million stories that are similar as, you know, the U.S. Sent troops further and further into the West, in our, you know, various fights with you know, cowboys and Indians is one way to phrase, but of course, you know, with the indigenous peoples here.
But also, I'd say it's even a little bit like Vietnam, but we're looking at the Vietnam of more the Green Berets with John Wayne than, you know, Platoon or anything that attempts to show,
right,
you know, maybe we shouldn't be here. You know?
Yeah. I mean, and the movie doesn't really super get into it, but I think you're absolutely right in that these guys, Hook is kind of your kind of POV character for the guy who he was there because he was a thief, right? And that was so now he was put into the military and he's still causing shenanigans, and but he's got
a great little arc where, you know, I guess he's ended up in the hospital with his sergeant who booked him, and charged him. But then his sergeant's also being sending his wages back to his wife. So he kind of respects that in a way, but also, you know, he can't like put down the front of just like, you know, this is bullshit. I shouldn't be here, you know.
Yeah. It's
and actually, interestingly, that was the role that Michael Caine went for and didn't get because they'd already hired James Booth. So Michael Caine said he owes his entire career to this very long bar in this particular pub or restaurant, because he said it took him so long to walk away down this bar that, you know, the producer said, well, hang on, we've got this other part. Can you do an upper class accent? And of course, Michael Caine was like, yes, I can do anything, you know? And that's how he got the other part.
That's really interesting to hear because he doesn't sound like himself in this movie, and it's his first big. There's in the titles the introducing Michael Caine, and then he shows up looking like Michael Caine, and then a completely different voice comes out of his face.
Yeah, and people give him a lot of stick for this film, but I think he does a very decent upper class accent. I think, you know, it's only the fact that we're so used to 60 years of Michael Caine basically being Michael Caine after this that this is kind of weird. But then, you know, I mean, I think he pulls it off pretty well, you know, if you can get past the fact that it is Michael Caine's star power, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, the guy kind of explodes on screen. It's hard to believe. I know he'd done a few other things before this, but for what's essentially a leading role, I mean, he's got the goods. He's Michael Caine right out of the box.
Well, he's also like, you know, and again, a very 60s kind of attitude towards class in the fact that, you know, he's almost working against Chard, because Chard is like, you know, obviously a working man who's worked his way up through the ranks and got to the same position as this guy who's kind of handed it in Caine's kind of place. And, you know, and they at the start they argue over who's in charge, and then Chard says, "We look, you know, I got my commission before yours, so basically shut up." But then, you know, Caine doesn't really help him. If anything, I mean, he doesn't really undermine him, but at the same time, he doesn't help him stop those other riders when they need extra help, you know, the ones who are passing through.
Yeah.
And, you know, and Stanley Baker even says, you know, you didn't do anything. I guess because you're in charge, you know, it's hard being in charge by yourself. And then, but towards the end, it's kind of nice seeing him kind of say, no, you know, we need you. I need you, you know, to kind of stay alive and stuff. And, you know, and it's just, you know, he's got a very good, I think by the end of it, he's got a much more open-minded view of not only like the guy who's been working with, but the Zulus themselves, actually. Because, you know, at the end, he's almost a bit hysterical. Why don't they attack? And, you know, the Boer guy says, well, you know, they're actually kind of like, you know, they're giving you a sign of respect.
Yeah, it's the arc is really interesting. He starts off clearly thinking of his trip to
Glory.
South Africa. Yeah, he's there to be on a hunting expedition, as far as he's concerned.
Well,
he's
yeah,
trying to shoot cheetahs or jaguars or whatever he's after out there.
Well, it's also really interesting because I was thinking this the other day, and I've seen this hundreds of times, but this is the first time I'd really thought it, I guess, for this. And we first see him trying to shoot a cheetah and missing a few times. He does finally get it. But then later on, he's like, well, look, you know, why don't you give me a band of guys? I can go up into the hills and flush the Zulus out. And already by that point, where's the audience like, you're going to die if you do that. You know, stay in the camp. You know, defend the camp. You know, there's way too many of them to like try that. So you can kind of see his tactics are kind of off anyway, you know?
Yeah. And the Boer guy is trying to help with trying to explain exactly what's about to happen and how they'll get flanked and all of that. And none of that seemed to have seeped in. But yeah, I mean, it's you've I know this is one of your big films, aside from the fact that you saw it a lot as a kid, kind of on the holidays.
Well, it's very patriotic, which again, has become a bit of a dirty word. I think in England it became a dirty word even earlier because it was kind of tied up a little bit with football hooliganism. And, you know, and people going abroad and going, we're England, and then smashing other countries up, and like basically causing a huge amount of trouble. But I think, it is a very patriotic. It's kind of like the Italian Job as well. It's patriotic. Whereas the Italian Job is patriotic, tongue in cheek. This is patriotic in, these guys actually did this, and most of them were just working class soldiers. And the film does, it's funny. Stanley Baker's Welsh, and obviously Richard Burton. You got Richard Burton's race because Richard Burton's Welsh as well. And in the film, they push it as like a kind of a Welsh regiment. I think in real life, it was a more kind of equal English-Welsh split. But yeah, it's still very, it's still kind of like, very like a classic film that we kind of hold up as like something we're quite proud of. And I guess it's like a last gasp of the Empire as well, really. The Empire power.
Yeah.
Before we started collapsing, I guess, after the First World War.
And you're aware the director's an American, right?
Yeah. And again, Michael Caine says the only reason he got the role was because the director was American. And he goes, an English director would not have hired me because he'd have said, no, you play working class people.
Yeah.
And he said, luckily, it was an American director. And he just said, yeah, you can do it,
That's interesting. I looked up, I did not heard of the director's name before. And so I looked at him and saw he was American. And I guess he'd been in Orson Welles' clique in I guess in like the 30s or 40s, and then got in somehow made his way into the British film industry. I couldn't quite follow how that had occurred, but to me it was really interesting. And then he ended up, part of what I was saying, like, oh, it wouldn't have mattered if I'd watched Zulu Dawn, was he wrote Zulu Dawn in the end. The final script was not his, but he was the one who kind of got the ball rolling by going, well, why don't we go ahead and tell the tale of what happened at, up the road a few hours back.
And I remember watching Zulu Dawn. It's not a bad film. It's got Burt Lancaster in there and Peter O'Toole. But it's more like watching that. It's more like, watching the kind of the English military just make a catalogue of bad decisions, which led them to all getting wiped out. It's a bit like I think I was saying to you the other day, it's a bit like a bridge too far. It's like, if only they hadn't done that, and if only that message had got through, and, they'd have done this, but then, of course, that's why it's kind of counterbalanced by this movie, I guess.
We have not done what I had planned to do at the beginning, which was tell the plot of the film, and this would be our official South Coast Media sponsored plot summary. But for all your media needs, South Coast Media of Houston, Texas. But I think
Zulu.
Yeah, I mean, the story is pretty straightforward as far as how it's told. I mean, it has this really nice kind of early framing bit of kind of starting with the Zulus are
doing fertility ritual.
Yeah, they're having a massive wedding and this kind of fertility ritual. And you have, and this is where I was like, okay, this is really interesting, because the framing is the Swiss
trying to explain to his daughter about sex, basically.
Yeah, and
daughter.
It's the Swiss missionary and his daughter, and she's horrified, and he's like, no, we're trying to get establish peace, and we're trying to, and then
trying to turn them all Christian as well, I guess.
It's how we rolled, man. This is we live in Texas. We should know a little bit about Brink coming in and starting to with missions and missionaries.
Well, that's, like you say, that's a great scene, because not only does it set up Hawkins and his daughter. Hawkins is like this kind of slightly world-weary character, and his daughter is somebody who's very naive and a bit too narrow-minded. But then you also kind of see the Zulu King as almost a bit benevolent, these weirdos are at my celebration, but I don't mind them. They're harmless.
Yeah.
And I love how when the guy runs in and obviously war is declared, it's one of the warriors kind of tries to grab the daughter, and the king just does a very small little gesture with his finger or something, and they just kill the warrior. It's I didn't ask him to do that, so kill him. It's kind of great.
Yeah, I mean, but it also shows kind of it might not be our culture, but it's a culture, and it is playing by distinct rules, and there's a lot of
I was actually impressed by the boobs, to be honest, for a film of this date. I wasn't expecting that. I was like, because first of all, I noticed, all the women were kind of like hilariously wearing these kind of, I guess, black panties. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. It's 1964. But then suddenly there was like a pretty long boob shot. And I'm like, oh, wow, for 1964, that's pretty, I bet they only got away with this because they were like, well, this is actually how they do a tribal dance in reality.
So is National Geographic a thing in England?
Yeah.
Okay. Because that was always the joke here. That was
go and look at that if you want to see.
Yeah. If you want, and I heard about it kind of like after the fact, like, well, when I was like in my like late teens, that had been a thing from like basically the 30s through like the 60s was like, ooh, you have a National Geographic subscription.
Cool.
It's the only place you're going to see a boob, in this world. And that was very much I felt like the, quote unquote documentary approach they were taking. And, it fair enough. I mean, they clearly didn't have to talk that many women into, feeling compromised. No. So,
I think those were real Zulus who were, quite happy to celebrate this, their past victories, really. And it's kind of interesting because like later on, there was a lot of like, because of apartheid, did none of these kind of natives get kind of paid? And then somebody said, no, that's rubbish. They did get paid. But because there's certain things going on, we actually kind of just left them, all the animals and all the cattle used in the film, because they could only get paid so much. And then also like, I think, I totally forgot what I was about to say. But so I was about to say something else about like, the actual, like showing the movie to them. So basically it was also like, I think the South African government didn't want to show the film in case it would kind of give them ideas. But then the producers said they actually took them to the local villages where a lot of the people had come from who were in the film and just kind of had private screenings for them and just said, there you are, there you are on screen and stuff.
Oh, that's rad. Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of nice.
There
was definitely a party going on, but not quite as bad as it's been documented, as in they never got paid, and that's not true.
Yeah. I did notice, and I saw something on Wikipedia about this that it cleared it up for me. I noticed when they were in the hospital, the guys who were showing up had like incredibly modern the Zulus had like 1964 haircuts, which I was like, because even for 64 in South Africa, those guys wouldn't have had those haircuts. No. And then I read, oh, well, they shot all the interiors for the hospital in England.
Yeah, I don't think, I think all the English scenes with James Booth, like Hook and stuff, that was all on a set.
Yeah. So those were British guys, which totally explained why they had 1960s British guy haircuts. So it was like just like few guys. It's like, wait a minute, they've shown like hundreds of people and none of them had these like spiffy hairdos except for that guy right there. So yeah, it did clear that up. But yeah, for the most part, because it's all exteriors and they have to show, the beautiful rolling hills of South Africa. You can't quite fake that. Well,
I think the joke is they actually picked a much more picturesque location than the real Walkstrift. So I think the real one doesn't have any hills or has like much smaller hills. So this was about 100 miles from the real one.
Oh god!
And it just looked a lot better.
Yeah, I was going to say, because it's amazing. The landscape is gorgeous, the whole thing, but also totally. Was that?
Sorry, I was just going to say, having those hills also allows it for them to like appear on the crest, like you say, and kind of sweep down in waves, and because some of the early attacks are really good. They're very like they're kind of caught in ditches and behind bushes and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like the Boer guy says, he kind of says, oh, they're testing your defenses. They're just like, they're sacrificing all these warriors just to see where you're weak.
Yeah. I mean, it's, it's a really, I will say, it's a 2 hour and 15-minute movie, something like that. There's a lot of setup. I would not say the first hour of it goes along at a rocket sled pace. It all has payoffs. It's all plant and payoffs for the second hour. But
it's a lot of character stuff, isn't it? It's a lot of like I love Jack Hawkins slowly slipping into like, drunken indignation. Like, you're all going to die. And it's like, was it like Nigel Green has that great line, like, be a good gentleman, sir, be quiet, you'll scare my lads. So good.
But yeah, they, like I was saying, there's so much they do with sound, between like the sound of the Zulus coming and them going, what is that, a train? What the hell is what is that sound? And then it starts off, of course, with the singing for the marriage ceremony. And then it kind of gets into, I wouldn't say they do it as like, we're not so different, you and I, but the singing of the Zulus as they're preparing to come at them in the morning. Yeah. And there's a sing-off between the British and the Zulus. Yeah. And they've set it up beautifully with the, we have a chorus here, and the engineer looking at him like, what are you talking about? You have a choir? It's right on the edge of parody, because it's kind of like, I think Chard goes, do you have a good, like, I don't know, upper whatever. He goes, we did say he got shots. It's like, well, no, whatever you got left. But yeah, it's an incredible sequence. I can only imagine what that would have been like to not be on my 45-inch TV, and I don't have a great sound system. But if you'd seen that in the theater, I can just imagine how the sing-off scene works. It's interesting because that music didn't really appear in the States much until when people became very anti-apartheid here. And you had like Black Mambazo was touring a lot, and Paul Simon had brought them over to the US. With Graceland and stuff. Mm-hmm. And then they had like the Power of One soundtrack and some other things like that like really brought that music. And I think of it, I target it all to the late 80s, early 90s in my head of like, oh, well, that's totally 90s music. It's like, no, this music is hundreds of years old. Oh yeah. Well, also, we have to mention, talk about music. This was also probably the big breakthrough for John Barry, who really kicked off his soundtrack career with this. Because before this, he'd been like his jazz kind of band. He was the John Barry 5 or the John Barry 7, and so he did this, and I actually just bought a new kind of like, copy of this before Christmas, funnily enough, before we even talked about doing it. And it's interesting because, this copy's got lots of extra stuff on it, this new kind of CD, but it's still only 20 minutes of music that he did for a 2-hour plus film. But I think, kind of showing how he was going to be in future, John Barry just did a fantastic main theme, which you can get a lot of mileage out of. But yeah, he also kind of did, the Zulu chants and all that kind of stuff, and I think this probably got him like bombed, really, afterwards. Yeah, the timing sounds right. Yeah. Well, it's also, talking about the sound in the movie, there's so much silence because they're in the middle of fields, and they have to be listening for what's going on all the time, but also just the natural silence of being that, before anything happens. They're on the water and they're kind of having to shout to each other because any distance with the wind blowing in the field is, and then it's just, unless you're in that hospital room, that's the only place that ever really feels chatty, I guess. Well, it's also very interesting because it's also kind of on the cusp of technology, because there's a lovely little scene early on where I think Chard kind of gives like another soldier his binoculars. And the soldier actually goes, these are fantastic, these, aren't they? Aren't they amazing? And you just like, you forget the fact that, those were probably new then, I guess. And not many people had really used them. Yeah, I don't know when you went from the field, the telescopic field glass to field glasses. I don't know. I guess it would have been right about then.
Yeah, and of course the big one is the guns, which the Zulus have got hold of guns and do seem to be able to use them pretty efficiently. But I mean, the whole reason I think the British managed to survive this was they had like a fantastic kind of like maneuver where basically they fire, those guys would get down, reload, the next kind of like line of guys behind them would move forward, fire, they'd get down, the original guys would get back up, fire, and they just keep doing that. So there's constant wall of bullets going, really.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. In the U.S. and the West, the repeating rifle was essentially really what a lot of people, it's if you ever want to Google the Winchester rifle, and kind of its impact on the settlement of the West, it's really incredible. It also leads to, I believe it's the Winchester mansion, that the widow of the Winchester fortune kind of was going mad living in this mansion and decided she was being haunted by the spirits of the natives who'd been killed by the rifle.
They made a film out of this, didn't they?
Yeah.
Helen Mirren or something?
Yeah. And so it's like she built this like maze-like mansion that still exists you can go to, that has like hallways that go nowhere, because she was convinced she could trick the ghosts into not finding her. If you go, so you probably go through walls. So that's not a very good plan. I'm sure it's all tied also into that like 1890s spiritualism stuff. I don't know, but it's anyway, it was interesting. I thought about that a little bit as the guys were going through their routines of like, the idea of the line of fire, which you see in like Revolutionary War movies and Civil War movies in the States. These guys had it down to, in a way I'd never seen before, with kind of the three lines rotating.
Yeah.
Doing all.
It's soldiering and like, I think, maneuvers and technology together kind of won the day, really, for a much smaller force. And I think there's a line even, isn't there, where like, one of the soldiers goes, it's a miracle, sir. And I think Stanley Baker goes, well, if it is, it's like a Winchester, 0.2 kind of miracle or whatever. Yeah.
It's there's just so many things that kind of go unmentioned in the film that you kind of have to have your eyes open watching it to see kind of what they're actually saying, how things are actually working. I'd be interested to watch Zulu Dawn. The closest thing I can compare it to is post Alamo. The Texas forces kind of ended up mustering, and they're going to be trying to make a decision about whether they're going to basically march out of Texas and run away, which didn't seem too likely, or confront Santa Anna's forces in San Jacinto. And basically, they had way fewer guys than the Mexican army had.
Yeah.
And so I'm in this case, just thinking about like all the might of what the British had in the, what was the first location?
Oh, in San Juan.
Yeah. And basically the Texans showed up while they were all napping, and they weren't ready with their cannons. They weren't ready with their guns. Like, they didn't know the Texans were coming. The Texans were able to basically just flood in and just dominate. I mean, the whole battle only took about 20 minutes.
Wow.
And they captured hundreds of people, including the president of Mexico. So they were not screwing around at that point. That's what I was thinking of when I was like, man, how, with all of the technology and all of that, how did that battle actually play out? So now I am curious to watch Zulu Dawn.
Yeah. I mean, like I say, I think it was like a bunch of very bad decisions, and like people went in the right place at the right time, and they weren't organized. And basically the opposite of this film. And I love the fact that Chard's an engineer as well, because I can't help thinking that really helped. Here's a guy who kind of builds things, and how do I make this work?
Mm-hmm.
And he's almost coming to this from a technical point of view. I mean, it's kind of great. I was really reading some interesting facts about this that I didn't know. While the main story is true, they obviously changed a few details. And None of these are that important. I mean, I'm sure they're important to the people involved, but they don't really change the story. But like, for instance, in real life, Hook was a model soldier, and he was actually guarding the hospital or prison. So his family walked out of the film in disgust at the premiere.
Oh man.
And I think the producers kind of said, yeah, we'll be totally honest. We had to have a character who was like a bad penny who'd make good by the end of it. And we just picked him. The opposite of that is the sergeant, who is kind of like almost like the second in command to Nigel Green. He's the guy with the moustache who, I had to narrow it down. They've all got moustaches, but he's the one that kind of goes, "You're a slovenly soldier, do your collar up." And then later on, he tries to undo his collar and gets shot while he's trying to help the other guy undo his collar. In real life, so in the film, he's kind of like a model, sergeant. In real life, he just got demoted for drunkenness, and he was a bit of a handful. So there's lots of things like that. The sing-off never happened.
Oh, yeah, I believe that.
And actually, the song they sing, Men of Harlem, which I think, isn't that the same song as the end of Men Who Would Be King? Which would make sense because those guys would have been soldiers at the same time.
Yeah.
Roughly. The one that Sean Connery sings on the bridge. But basically, that song did become the regiment's song, but not for a few more years. They actually had a different song at this point. And like I said, the Zulus never kind of like, kind of gave them like a signal of respect to the end. They just like, they had actually lost a lot of people, and then they saw reinforcements coming as well. So they kind of backed off. Yeah. So, lots of little changes, but that's more like, just changing the sprinkles on a cake. The cake's kind of the same, I think.
Yeah. Trying to find the name of something real fast.
I'm sure like the real Reverend Witt wasn't like a massive alcoholic who's shouting all the time as well.
Yeah, I don't even know how you'd be a raving alcoholic in the wilds of
I'm impressed no other soldiers have found his hidden bottle, to be honest, in that how many bottles has he got hidden around?
Yeah. So a few years ago, an author named Candice Millard put out a book that it takes place years after all of this. And I'm just going to plug it because it's an amazing book. It's called Hero of the Empire, The Boer War, A Daring Escape, and the Making of Winston Churchill. It's basically like follows Winston Churchill and how he became known in England, and his whole background. It's a page turner. She's an amazing writer. She's literally one of my favorite writers right now. She's only done like 3 different novels, or not novels, because they're not historical fiction. They're just history, but she writes them like they're novels. And I totally recommend it. It's a crazy story, and you totally see how Churchill, who was kind of a big nerd before all of this, became out of his experience in South Africa as a British hero, and then was able to parlay that into a political career, which he kind of had in mind before he went to South Africa, and hadn't really known how he would do that. So, yeah. I mean, it's a great film. Come to think of it, I'm pretty sure that's a different song at the end of Man Who Would Be King, but it's very much the same era anyway, because they have red coats as well. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's Minstrel Boy, isn't it? And Man Who Would Be King. But yeah, no, I just like, I mean, for me, and another film kind of ingrained in my soul. I hadn't seen it for about 10 years before I watched it the other night. I guess because I watched it so much as a kid. And like you said, it's a film you can watch with your dad, with your family. Grandma's going to love it. It's not too gory. No, I mean, for a bunch of people getting stabbed with bayonets and spears, they handle it very, very well. They don't.
In fact, I was a bit disappointed. I was a little bit disappointed because, like, especially early on, I'm like, he's obviously just sticking that spear behind the guy, and the guy's going and falling over.
There was one shot I saw that was like, you weren't even close to that guy when he was. dramatically act as if he'd been bayoneted. So
also, like when Stanley Baker gets injured, I'm like, dude, he scratched you. And he's like, I have to go to the infirmary. And then he kind of sees everybody fighting. He goes, no, I can bear it. And you're like, you got a scratch, dude. It's like, you shouldn't even be going to the infirmary. And it's funny because, you know, I guess this is how films have changed over the years. Because I remember being really shocked when I saw Braveheart for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
Because you actually saw axes going in and legs coming off. And to be honest, now Braveheart probably looks a bit quaint compared with some of the stuff we get. You know, I'm sure Ridley Scott's done nastier stuff since then, and other directors, like, you know, I'm thinking the start of Saving Private Ryan and stuff.
Right, yeah.
But so Zulu does look very quaint and very PG, like a very safe PG. But you know, I think the performances are great. You know, like you said, great setup, great sound design, fantastic music, you know, good performances. And, you know, and I love the end where Richard Burton kind of comes back in and, like, you know, kind of calls off all the Victoria Crosses won. And, you know, you can have a close up of each character. Yeah.
I was shocked and I believed it. I saw it said 64 on the movie when it started. I'd always thought it was a 70s era movie. And I think I thought that because the quality of the cinematography genuinely feels to me about it does not feel like part of the 50s. In 64, you're still in that era of some of the stuff looks like it's from the 50s, but you're also only 3 years away from Bonnie and Clyde, which kind of to me is like that does not look like a 60s era movie. That looks like it's about 1975 to me whenever I watch Bonnie and Clyde. This movie feels to me like it's about 72. So so it ends up looking a little newer than it actually is until you see Michael Caine and go, he's in diapers here. He's so young.
Well, it's like an epic. It's like an old school epic. And they had all those stodgy epics in the 50s and 60s, and they kind of died out by the 70s, really. But it's a good epic. It feels quite modern, maybe because it was made by young working class British people, mainly. And I feel like it doesn't have that kind of like, you know, that Hollywood cheese that affected.
Yeah.
A lot of those, you know, Wes Charlton Heston or John Wayne.
Well, I mean,
I love Charlton Weston and John Wayne, don't get me wrong. But I'll sort this out.
But it's also like when I think epic, I think, you know, Lawrence of Arabia. That's the first movie that leaps to my mind. And it also
that one I would say is like, that's a cut above though. That's like David Lean, so you know.
Right. But it doesn't it doesn't try to have the same. You walk into Lawrence of Arabia and it's like gravitas. We're going to drench you in gravitas. And I'm talking about literally like maybe one of my second or third favorite movies. Like that's not a criticism of it. This movie, like you were saying, feels positively working class from the very beginning.
Well, it's urgent. It's urgent. Like you say, I think Lawrence of Arabia is like Spielberg making a film now, whereas this is more like Raiders of the Lost Ark. It feels very on the fly and like, you know, boom, 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 you know. It's almost like, you know, it's obviously not handheld, but you could imagine this almost being handheld, you know.
Yeah, I mean, if cameras hadn't weighed what they weighed in 1964, I'm sure they would have given it a go. You're still years away from a Steadicam at this point. And
I think in a way, having probably a lower budget than it maybe needed worked in its favor because it made it more. Like, you know, almost like Hammer films, you know, they had to come up with creative solutions to things.
Yeah. And there's so much there in the story, like in the sound and kind of making sure they're giving their characters their beats. So you care about them as the thing goes along. For Americans, we're not familiar with this story, you know, flat out. Yeah. We know the British were dinking around in South Africa, you know, for decades.
During the Masons.
Yeah. But it's, you know, we don't know a whole lot about it other than you all did that for a while and then you went home. So you know, we assume, there were events like this, but to see it actually portrayed and then to see a movie from 64 that fully acknowledges the humanity of the people on the other side is kind of remarkable, because you are talking about 5 years after something that probably otherwise, if it was an American movie, would have not done that. It would have been super cheesy. I can't imagine, honestly, how Americans, I mean, it was an American director, but I can't imagine, had this come out of the studio system, what it would have looked like. It would have been ridiculous, and probably shot on a studio soundstage and been insane.
Maybe wearing too much lipstick. Well, yeah. Michael Caine does seem to be wearing a bit of makeup in this, but
that's his natural glow, man.
To bring his eyes out. But no, it's like, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because this is a few years before all those films that started to deconstruct everything. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like The Wild Bunch, like Bonnie and Clyde, like Little Big Man. And of course in the 70s they really got into full, Top Gear with all that stuff. So this is before that, definitely. But then I think it is like a little bit punk or a little bit anarchic for the time. It's like a breath of fresh air. It's a bit like Bond. When Bond first started, it was like, you'd kind of seen foreign locations before, but never kind of done that well or like that, And so it's a bit of a breath of fresh air, really,
What happened to the actor who what was his name? Chard?
Stanley Baker.
Yeah,
that's interesting because I've always tried to kind of look for Stanley Baker stuff, and he was kind of similar to Richard Burton, but if Richard Burton kind of embraced the excesses of stardom and life and everything, drinking, everything, I feel like Stanley Baker was more like a bit on the quieter, in the background. Kind of, and he did do films after this. I know he died pretty young. I think at the end of the 70s. I think from cancer. I've got another great film, like very British film, called Hell Drivers that he's the lead in, and the cast in that is absolutely amazing because you've got Patrick McGoohan, Gordon Jackson, Herbert Lom, and a very young Sean Connery as all these truck drivers. And they have to basically drive these trucks as fast as possible down to basic quarry, pick up some stuff, take it, dump it, then drive back to the quarry. And of course, they get paid in how many loads they can do.
Okay. I was saying, because it's starting to sound like Smokey and the Bandit, and I've seen that.
Well, no, it's more like a kind of like a working class man finds out corruption in his job because, a couple of these drivers have died and starts investigating. And realizes that, it's all kind of like, there's evil doing going on. But just for the cast alone, that's an amazing film because you're just like, oh, look at all these guys before they kind of got famous. Yeah. But he's great in that. So he was like a real, incredibly solid British, I guess Welsh-born actor who, never really became a superstar internationally. I mean, this was probably his biggest film, I think. But definitely had a very solid career all his life in Britain. Yeah.
I didn't really recognize him. And Jamie, in fact, asked me if it was someone from something else, and I was like, no, that's Kenneth Mars. That guy's an American. It's like they have the same jawline. I totally know why she asked.
But I mean, he's obviously got enough star power at the time to not only produce this and get this story off the ground, but also to get Richard Burton to come and narrate it, which is no mean feat, really. Because Burton would have been huge at this time. Yeah. That's a bit like, I can't really think of the equivalent, but like, I don't know.
Harrison Ford showing up, maybe.
Yeah, getting Tom Cruise to come and do a cameo in your film or whatever, Yeah.
Now that you say it, it's really weird Tom Cruise hasn't decided to do stuff like that.
Well, I was thinking, I guess he did in Tropic Thunder and stuff.
God, yeah, but that was one movie 15 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, I guess he's so busy making Mission Impossible all the time. He hasn't got time.
I think they're shooting 5 of them back to back right now.
He's gone.
They are doing 2 or 3 of them right now, right?
Yeah. I think they're doing 7 and 8 back to back. He's gone a bit James Cameron.
Well, he also knows that his own. He's like, I'm about to turn 70. I can only do this so long.
Then
I
so
don't
long I
know.
could run for 100 meters very, very fast for no reason on a roof.
I think we're off topic, but yes. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for listening in. I got such a kick out of finally getting to watch Zulu. It's a truly remarkable movie. It for having echoes of all those other movies we mentioned. It really is a unique film. And hey, you get to see young dashing Michael Caine in a pith helmet for two hours straight. So
I mean, like I say, the bottom line for this, I think, is it's great seeing, I think equal respect given to both sides. And, they don't cast anybody as the villain, which is very interesting, especially in this time period. And it's the fact that they kind of say, well, look, we're going to show the Zulus. They have their own culture. And, and they even like talk them up, it's like, I think, the Boer guy kind of says, well, they can run, 50 miles and fight a battle. And, I think the Welsh soldier goes, well, well, where's the common sense in that, running to like have a fight? And, and then I think, doesn't Michael Caine at one point go, cowardly blacks, when all servants run off? And basically, the guy goes, really? You think they're cowardly? The Zulus? Look what they've done to your forces. So it's just like, that's very, very forward thinking for this time. And very fair, as well. It's also very similar to the Native Americans, really. And it's the fact that, we've seen films that have kind of like, especially obviously more recent films that have kind of like shown, I think, the big one was Dancer with Wolves, wasn't it? That was the big one that was like, Kevin Costner goes and lives with them and becomes one. And then, he kind of sees the other side of, and, very preachy. I know it could probably date it quite badly. But,
you guys can't see me rolling my eyes. Just talking about Dances with Wolves.
I picked them up and rolled them back. That's how much you rolled them. But, but yeah, kind of say the same thing. I mean, a world away from John Wayne shooting them off the top of a wagon.
Yeah, I think you need to go through that necessary step in a lot of ways of a Dances with Wolves that's like highly palatable to the, your mass audience. To
totally, got to get the message out there first.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really think of. I mean, even if they were, you saw a Western where they were like, oh, the Comanches or, great warriors or whatever. It was still definitely treated and very differently than in the 60s than it would have been treated like this movie was treating the Zulus. I can't even really think of any examples off the top of my head of like, well, a great example of that would be, where things were pre Dance with the Wolves, because, I haven't watched that many Westerns from that era, and that would be the closest thing. You get into kind of latter era John Wayne, and then you're going like McClintock. What he was doing at this period where he tried to show the Native Americans in a better light, but it's in a comedy. So
it's also, I think, say even Clint Eastwood, I saw The Outlaw Josie Walls pretty recently.
Ooh, good movie. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, really good movie. And there's Indians in there. There's like was it Chief Dan, who played in quite a few films. He's great. But, but they're still cast a little bit as kind of victims, like, our land's being taken away. We've lost our traditions. Mm-hmm. So I think with Zulu, it's just kind of cool saying, like you said, no, they're just badass, and they're, it's like when an unmovable force meets an unstoppable object is basically Zulu,
Yeah. Yep. That's totally true. Everybody, thank you so much. Really appreciate you, Simon. And we will be back soon with whatever we do next, whatever that might be.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye. That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.